All right, welcome back. Sorry, I had to go get a cough drop. Uh, back with online classroom. We will be covering the stomach, the small intestines, and the large intestines. Pretty much the rest of the primary organs for digestive system. First, if we take a look at the stomach here, it's kind of this J-shaped structure. It's got a lot of layers here. You have the cardia here, the fundus, or fundus, not fundus. Fundus here, the body, antrum, and pylorus. Food's going to enter in here, go through here, and exit into your small intestines here, which is your duodenum. And inside you have these kind of brain-like looking structures. Those are called your rugae and your lumen. Uh, Purpose of those is so that it can contract and expand. The one thing I do want to look at is this extra layer here. You do have an extra layer. It's called the oblique muscle layer, located right here in the musculaire. So you have an extra layer there, which is going to be used to help mechanically digest food. Functions: temporary storage of ingested food, mechanically breakdown of ingested food, chemical breakdown by enzymes and acids, and production of intrinsic factors. Notice there's no absorption yet. So far, you have not absorbed anything yet that you have ingested, that you have taken and eaten yet. So it has to go through your stomach and then into your small intestines before you even begin to absorb nutrients. So on the surface here, you have these gastric pits. It looks like it are these pores, which makes sense because if you look down, you have these gastric glands. Here, you're going to have epithelial cells, and these play a major role in your stomach. These two things, because this is the mucosa layer, a little bit different than that of your esophagus, your pharynx, and in your mouth. Actually, a lot different. They don't have this. And this is going to be because it's going to secrete a lot of mucus, right? And it's an alkaline mucus, so that way, when it is going to lower the pH of the stomach, so that way your body can handle it. Okay, so that's the mucosa layer there. Submucosa, blood vessels, connective tissue, same thing. Then you have your muscular tissue and more serosa connective tissue, keeping it in place. That being there, your three muscle types there. And then inside you have your mucosa. I do want to talk about these cells here. These play an important part. Chief cells and parietal cells. Chief cells secrete protein called pepsinogen. That pepsinogen is going to bind with the hydrochloric acid. Okay, that hydrochloric acid is going to make what is called pepsin. Okay, pepsin is important because that's going to help break down protein. Okay, so proteins don't start to get broken down until your stomach. Fats and carbs are getting broken down in your mouth. So proteins a little bit longer, a little bit tougher. So therefore, you're going to use the hydrochloric acid to make pepsin and be able to break down your uh, proteins. Gastrin is also something on here. Gastrin is pretty much going to stimulate everything and contraction, secretion. So it plays a huge role. It is a hormone that is going to be used in monitoring uh, gastric phases and things like that. You have secretions and you have this phase. First off, this is controlled by the nervous system and also the endocrine or hormones. Okay, and you probably have noticed this before you even realize this. Okay, there's a lot of conditioning, and this happens a lot with dogs and pets. You get them to do something, they get a treat kind of deal, and they want to replace that activity with that treat for that feeling. So you can condition the mind in order to increase the appetite or gastric secretions and things like that. So what happens here is side of food or something that's going to start the process of gastric secretions. Okay, so those gastric juices are going to start get secreted to make way for the food that you're about to eat. And that happens here first in the cephalic meaning the head. So that is this reflex. You see the sight of food, the smell of food, maybe the touch of food, whatever, that's going to start that process. So the first process here is going to be this inhibitory, or sorry, this uh, secretion of those gastric juices. How to inhibit that is depression and loss of appetite will inhibit that. So if you are depressed or you suddenly get a loss of the appetite, then you're going to reverse that effect and you're not going to secrete it and therefore not be as hungry. After that, you are going to obviously eat the food, swallow it, then it gets into the gastric phase. And that's once the food enters the stomach. Uh, this lasts usually 3 to 4 hours here. And actually, food content inside the stomach can tell a lot about a person as far as how long ago they ate and time frame and stuff like that. And that's why it's used in forensic science as far as to create what is called a PMI or postmortem interval, as far as how long ago they were alive. So this takes a lot longer of a process than uh, most usually would think. So it's about 3 to 4 hours as far as just this phase alone. Here you're going to activate stretch receptors. Stretch receptors are going to play in a relay or a reflex to the nervous system, and hormones are going to release gastric juices. Now, in order to inhibit that, high acidity as well as emotional distress can cause that process to not work. So high acidity is going to secrete more mucus, not gastric juices, as gastric juices is going to raise the pH a little bit, or I guess lower the pH. And when you want to, the lower the pH, the more acidic something is. So in order to raise that pH, you're going to secrete more mucus in order to cause it to um, uh, go back, and you're not going to harm yourself. um, and then third and finally, you have the intestinal phase. Okay, and this is where the partially digested food is going to enter the duodenum. Okay, and you're going to get this chyme, this liquid mixture that's going to kind of build up there, and it's going to help break it down chemically. So you're going to get this chemical digestion, and that's pretty much what gastric secretion is. It's just really chemical digestion, using chemicals, hormones, things like that to break down food into smaller parts, so that way it can be taken into your stomach or into your body through your intestines. Um, I do want to cover one thing that I forgot to go over, and that has to deal a little bit with these lining of the mucosa layer. Now, a couple things about this. Obviously, this is a very harsh environment. Your stomach with a pH of about 1.65 to about 3. So the pH of this is pretty high. Therefore, you need to have some sort of defense mechanisms put in place. And God has really created uh, us in an image that we can really do that. And that has to deal with the stomach structure and really this mucosa lining. There's really three things that help into the lining of the stomach that allows us to have such a high, uh, or I guess a low pH in acid in our stomach. And that being first, the mucus that is secreted is a bicarbonate mucus, which is going to use to neutralize acid. So you mix it with an acid with bicarbonate, you're going to lower that pH a little bit. So that mucus there is going to help lower that pH, and that's why if you're high in acidity, it's going to secrete mucus rather than gastric juices, because it's going to help balance that out and raise that acidity, so that way, or the pH. So back to a neutral, water being neutral at 7. So therefore, no more gastric juices. Mucosa or mucus is going to be secreted and help neutralize that. Second being that it's going to have tight junctions. If you look in here, you're going to have tight junctions. Pretty much what it means is it's going to overlap. So that way, that acid, that stomach acid, the harsh contents inside your stomach cannot get into your body. It's very painful if it does. That, my friends, is called an ulcer. Okay? When your stomach contents pretty much get through the wall and into your body, it is painful because it's so acidic and it's so harsh, and your other organs and things are not uh, capable of withstanding that and not made that way. So, um, therefore, the tight junctions are very similar to that of what your skin's going to be like. Your skin has these junctions, kind of these overlapping, really tight cells that are put together so that way the water cannot get in there. Well, same kind of idea. It's a tight junction that's not allowing anything to penetrate through. And third and finally, this here, okay, is going to be a lining of stem cells, okay, which makes sense. The more harsh your environment, the more you're going to have to replenish those cells. So therefore, these stem cells here are going to replenish the lining of the stomach every 3 to 6 days. So you have a new stomach lining. If you're listening to this on Wednesday, you'll have a new one by at least a weekend. And we're going to jump into a little bit about digestion. So nutrients are not absorbed. I really want to focus on that. They're not going to be absorbed. Cells are covered in mucus. They lack transport mechanisms. Okay, so they're not going to be transporting things. The gastric lining is impermeable to water. This is really the reason why things aren't absorbed. It's really impermeable, period. And digestion has not proceeded to completion by the time chyme leaves the stomach. So what's that saying is it is partially digested. It's not fully digested yet. So you still have some digestion that's going to happen in the small intestines. So let's get into the small intestines. Now, small intestines, you may look at this and say, wow, this is really long. Why the heck do they call it a small intestine? Well, that has to go with the diameter. The diameter of this is what gives it its name of the small intestines. This is 4 centimeters to 2.5 centimeters, which is much smaller than your large intestine. Okay, 90% of your absorption occurs here, which would make sense because of it being so long. And if it has to pass through that, and that's the function of it, then it's going to have a long time to do it. Now, your small intestine is broken up into 3 parts: your duodenum, which connects to the stomach, then your jejunum here. Okay, if you want to think of it as kind of that top layer or middle third of it, and then your ileum, which is going to connect to the large intestines. Okay, so your duodenum encloses the pancreas, which your pancreas is going to secrete juices, which we'll cover when we go over accessory organs of the digestive system. Okay, so your pancreas and actually your liver there will join in that party as well. You know, that mixed bowl, gastric juices, just so much fun in there. Jejunum making up about 2.5 meters of that. The 3.5 meters of the rest being the ileum. So your duodenum's not very long compared to these other ones. The 2.5 meter of your jejunum is really going to provide the bulk of the chemical digestion and nutrient absorption. And then the 3.5 meter long, the last part before moving into the large intestine. So therefore, you get this most of it happening, most of the absorption happening in the jejunum. That's a fun word. Now let's take a look here. Once again, you are exposed to the surface. Okay, it is not considered inside of your body when the food is inside the intestine. Okay, so think of your body as like a donut. Okay, outside of the edge of the donut is the environment. then the actual dough or bread of the donut being your body, and the circle being what's inside your digestive system. Okay, being right in about here. Okay, being the donut, the air where the donut hole would be. Okay, so you're not actually inside the body yet, and it's not considered inside the body. And that what does not get inside the body gets pushed along. Okay, so you do have what is called an apical surface, meaning it is exposed to the environment. Therefore, this is going to be epithelial. Once again, you have your tissues, mucosa tissue in here, submucosa blood, a lot more blood vessels here in order to take in nutrients and water and things like that, which you can see here. Okay, so a lot of blood there. And then you also have your muscularis externa, your muscles here. Still have to get that food through. And then your serosa, very, very dense serosa here, called your mesentery. And that's what you're going to hold all of your guts, to say, in place. So if you look at the structure of these, you have these long things here. Okay, you have epithelial cells, all right? But these finger-like projections are going to serve a purpose. Now, think about what is happening here. You have absorption, okay, of nutrients. And just like you did in the respiratory system with the lungs, you had these alveoli that increase surface area. Well, these villi, these little projections here, okay, on these cells are going to increase the surface area. Okay, together, the villi and the plicae circularis, that's these kind of folds, okay, these folds in here, are going to increase the total area of absorption from 3,300 centimeters squared, which would happen is just you took the surface area without these, to approximately 2 million centimeters. So you have a lot of increased surface area, which allows you to uptake more food. Now, what makes that uptake? Well, that's going to be pretty much controlled by hormones. Okay, so gastrin, like I said, mostly in the stomach. Okay, and it's going to affect, stimulate just about everything, contraction, enzymes, things like that. Then you have secretin, also duodenum. Okay, target for that is going to be pancreas, stomach, liver. So it's got different things that is going to happen there. And then you have cholecystokinin, cholecystokinin, CCK, a little bit easier to say. Once again, secreted in the origin, or sorry, in the duodenum. And this one here, gastric inhibitory peptide, GIP, secreted in the duodenum. So if you look here, like it said, the duodenum is going to do the chemical digestion. Okay, so chemical digestion is going to be done in the small intestine. Okay, or sorry, in the duodenum of the small intestine. All right. So bear with me, as for some reason I decide to have to go in here and get the other notes. I decided to stop it, which makes sense. So I'm going to be getting the notes for the large intestines here, because you can't forget about those ones. That is mainly also called your colon. So that's a cool fun fact for you. Your small intestine and large intestine. Okay. So let's get into the large intestine here. So as you can see, there's different parts of it. Cecum here is going to be this part where it connects to the ileum, or the small intestine. Then it's going to go up, okay, and over, then down and around and out. Okay, attached to your cecum is going to be your appendix. Okay, appendicitis, I don't know why this is saying that, is when it is going to be swollen for the most part, or inflamed, and it bursts, it hurts extremely bad, and you need to go to a doctor right away. All right, so functions of the large intestine. reabsorption of water and compaction of feces. Okay, and that's really an important one. It's going to be that reabsorption of water, absorption of vitamins, important vitamins, and storage of fecal matter. So, as you can see, divisions, cecum, opening of the small intestine, houses the appendix. Colon, you have 3 parts. Uh, some say you can have 4 parts, and break these apart: the descending and sigmoid, which is kind of this bend here. But for now, because I have it here, we will make it as 3 parts. And then you have the rectum. Now, once again, the large intestine is not as long as your small intestine, but it is much wider. So, absorption and movement. Okay, so what is it going to absorb? Well, it's going to absorb water, bile salts, vitamins K, biotin, and vitamin B5. And it's going to get organic waste, toxins, these things we want to get rid of. Don't know why I have them here on absorption. So that is a classic whoopsies. Movement. Here you have a cecum to the transverse colon is very slow, which makes sense. Why? Because what's happening? You're going to absorb water. We want to make sure we do not lose water as we maintain homeostasis, so we want to absorb that. Then the contractions force material into rectum, causing the urge to defecate. So what's going to happen, which we'll talk a little bit about that process, is you once again you have stretch receptors, very similar to that of what we'll talk about in your bladder as well. These stretch receptors, as it fills up, as they stretch, are going to send a signal to the brain, and that's that urge you get to want to relieve yourself. Hopefully, we make it so we will talk about this. You really have two uh, different things we will talk about. So the defecation reflex, one is a short feedback loop. Once again, these stretch receptors stimulate local peristaltic contraction in colon and rectum. So what that's saying, peristaltic contraction is the food or the waste moving into the rectum. Okay, and as that is moving in, it's going to cause it to distension. It says that stretching. That's another word for stretching. So contractions or move that toward the anus and increased distension, and that's going to then signify stretch receptors, which also stimulate the parasympathetic motor neurons that stimulate the increased peristalsis in colon and pushes the feces, further increasing distension. Okay. So here you have the picture here. So you have the sigmoid colon. You have sensory nerve fibers. These are these stretch receptors that we kind of talked about. And then you have involuntary motor nerve, which is your parasympathetic division. Okay, and you have two sphincters, external and internal sphincters. So therefore, you have two lines of defense, I guess you can say. So you have the stretch receptors that are happening here that's pushing, this is moving through. It's going to cause a signal to the spinal cord or the pelvic nerve to be exact, and that's going to cause a signal to be released. Here you see the parasympathetic system releasing it here, maybe slowing down the process here as well as getting pretty much ready. And then you have the voluntary motor control here to relieve yourself. Okay, so you have the first or the internal sphincter being involuntary, as it is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is involuntary motor control. Then you have the motor or voluntary control here being on the external, so that way you can control yourself. So what happens with those that can't anymore do for whatever reasons is they lose the fact or they lose the ability to control their external sphincters, and their voluntary sphincters are going to be what decides when they use the restroom. So here we will get into nutrition a little bit later. We'll talk about it in our third set of notes, uh, and pretty much how all of this turns into food and fuel and why you need it. So, once again, we started with food in the mouth and we end it with waste out of the body. So, thanks for tuning in and have a great day after that.